the Philippine sun illuminated the streets of Manila as Emmanuel Jr., known to many as Pacquiao Jr., the eldest son of Manuel Manny Pacquiao, nervously walked toward Bayanihan School, a prestigious institution attended by children from influential families. At 12 years old, Emmanuel Jr. was a shy and studious boy who always carried the weight of his famous surname. Although his father insisted on raising him with humility, away from the spotlight that always pursued him. That specific morning, the boy wore his uniform impeccably ironed by his mother, Jinky, who always encouraged him to do his best regardless of the family's status. Bayanihan School was known not only for its academic excellence, but also for the strict teacher, Dalisay Magsaysay, a middle-aged woman who had taught mathematics for more than 20 years and carried a reputation for relentless severity. The school's wide corridors were decorated with trophies and medals won by students in national and international competitions, creating an environment of constant pressure for results. For Emmanuel Jr., each step down that gleaming corridor represented a silent battle against the expectations everyone placed on him, not for his own merit, but for the surname he carried. That week, Emmanuel Jr.'s class was involved in an important mathematics project that would account for a large portion of the semester grade. Despite his continuous efforts, the boy faced considerable difficulties with numbers and equations, something that deeply tormented him, especially because it contrasted with the physical excellence his father had always demonstrated in the ring. At home, Emmanuel Jr. spent hours poring over books, trying to understand concepts that seemed so natural to his classmates, while his father, between political and social commitments, tried to find time to support him, even without mastering the subject. Teacher Dalisay's classroom was an environment of absolute silence, interrupted only by the sound of chalk on the blackboard and the occasional questions she threw like true tests of academic survival. On that specific day, while explaining a complex mathematical formula, the teacher decided to evaluate the students' progress with direct and unexpected questions. Dalisay's severe eyes scanned the room, finally stopping on Emmanuel Jr., who immediately felt a chill down his spine when he realized he would be the next to be questioned about content that, despite his efforts, he had not yet fully understood. The silence in the room intensified when teacher Dalisay called Emmanuel Jr. to the board to solve a particularly complex equation. With hesitant steps, the famous boxer's son rose from his desk, feeling the weight of all his classmates' stares. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the chalk, and his mind seemed to empty under the pressure of the moment. He was about to face a humiliation that would mark not only his academic record, but also his confidence, already fragile from growing up in the shadow of a legendary father, Emmanuel Jr. As hands trembled as he held the chalk, unable to begin solving the equation that teacher Dalisay had written on the blackboard, the silence in the room was oppressive, broken only by the occasional sound of muffled laughter from some classmates who were amused by the visible discomfort of the legendary boxer's son. Sweat ran down the boy's forehead as he stared at the numbers and symbols that seemed to dance before his eyes, refusing to make sense. Despite all the nights he had spent studying, teacher Dalisay observed with an impassive expression, arms crossed and lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. After almost a minute of awkward silence, she adjusted her glasses on her thin nose and let out an audible sigh that amplified the tension in the environment. In a cutting voice, the teacher began questioning how it was possible that the son of someone so famous and successful could be so mediocre at a simple math equation, insinuating that perhaps Emmanuel Jr. had inherited only his father's name, but none of his qualities of determination or excellence. The teacher's words hit Emmanuel Jr. like physical blows, each deprecating comment further diminishing his already fragile self-confidence. The mention of his father made the situation even more painful, as Emmanuel Jr. had always strived to build his own identity, away from inevitable comparisons. Tears threatened to form in his eyes, but the boy contained them with all the strength he could gather, remembering what his father always said about maintaining dignity even in the most difficult moments. The incident at the blackboard lasted less than 5 minutes, but to Emmanuel Jr. it seemed like an eternity. When he was finally dismissed to return to his place, the path back to his desk seemed endless, with each step echoing in the sepulchral silence of the room. Some classmates looked away in embarrassment, Others observed with barely disguised pity, and a small group, led by Mateo, the son of an important local politician, exchanged mocking smiles. Upon returning to his seat, Emmanuel Jr. felt smaller than ever, crushed by the weight of public humiliation. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of shame and isolation for Emmanuel Jr. During the break, he avoided the busy cafeteria, preferring to find refuge in the empty library, where he hid between the bookshelves, trying to process what had happened. The pain of humiliation was intensified by the fear of telling his parents about the incident, especially his father, who, despite all his fame and success, always emphasized the importance of education, something he himself had not had the opportunity to complete in his youth, marked by extreme poverty. In the Pacquiao mansion, located in an upscale neighborhood of Manila, Manny was reviewing some documents related to his social projects when he noticed Emmanuel Jr.'s unusual behavior upon arriving from school. The boy, normally eager to share the day's experiences, went directly to his room, muttering only an almost inaudible greeting. Years of observing opponents in the ring had made Manny especially sensitive to body language, and something in his son's downcast walk immediately triggered an alert in his father's mind. After giving Emmanuel Jr. some time alone, Manny knocked gently on his son's bedroom door, entering with a gentleness that contrasted with his public image as a relentless fighter. He found the boy lying on the bed, pretending to read a book, but with red eyes that betrayed recent crying. With patience and using the Cebuano dialect they spoke in more intimate moments, Manny sat on the edge of the bed and, without directly pressuring, began talking about the days when he himself faced seemingly insurmountable difficulties, creating a safe space for his son to open up. Slowly, like a dam breaking, Emmanuel Jr. began to narrate the humiliating events of that day. His voice choked with contained emotion. He described the cruelty of teacher Dalice's words, the shame of being exposed in front of his classmates, and worst of all, the comment about not being worthy of the surname he carried. As his son spoke, Manny maintained a serene expression, but those who knew him well would notice the subtle tension in his jaw, the same sign that appeared moments before a decisive blow in the ring. What hurt Manny most was not the mention of his name, but realizing how those words had deeply affected his son's self-esteem. As someone who had grown up in extreme poverty in General Santos City, selling cigarettes on the streets to help his family survive, Pacquiao knew well the devastating power of public humiliation. His own journey from misery to international stardom had been marked by countless moments of doubt and disbelief from others, overcome with silent determination and tireless work, qualities he had always tried to instill in his children. After hearing the whole story, Manny hugged his son tightly, promising he would resolve the situation, not as the famous boxing champion or as the influential politician he had become, but simply as a father protecting his son. That night, while Emmanuel Jr. finally slept after emotional exhaustion, Manny and Jinky talked at length about how to proceed. Jinky, always the voice of prudence, suggested a diplomatic approach, while Manny's thoughtful expression revealed that he was already formulating a plan that would surprise everyone involved, especially teacher Dalice, who apparently judged people solely by their ability to solve mathematical equations. The next morning, even before the first bell at Bayanihan School announced the start of classes, a modest Toyota parked in the courtyard, normally occupied by luxury vehicles. From the car emerged a man of average height, wearing simple jeans and a discreet polo shirt, without any of the ostentatious signs of wealth that might betray his identity. It was Manny Pacquiao, who had opted for a purposefully common appearance, reminiscent of his youth days before worldwide fame, a strategy he frequently used when he wanted to go unnoticed among ordinary people. He had dismissed his usual security detail and was accompanied only by a trusted driver, as he often did when he wanted to handle personal matters without drawing attention. At the school's reception, receptionist Amihan almost dropped the phone when she recognized the unexpected visitor, despite his modest appearance. With professionalism quickly recovered, she led Manny to the office of Director Bayani Rizal, a man known for his excessive admiration for figures of power and influence. The contrast between Manny's simplicity and the ostentation of the director's office was stark. While the boxer sat with the humble posture he had never abandoned despite his achievements, Bayani nervously adjusted his expensive tie, and reorganized the objects on his desk carved from imported noble wood. The initial conversation was marked by the director's attempts to impress his illustrious visitor, mentioning charity events he had participated in and political connections he carefully cultivated. Manny listened with patience, the same he demonstrated when studying an opponent in the ring, waiting for the exact moment to introduce the real reason for his visit. When he finally mentioned the incident involving his son and teacher Dalisay, Director Bayani's expression visibly transformed, alternating between discomfort and concern about possible negative repercussions for the school's reputation. Director Bayani immediately began elaborating excuses, explaining that teacher Dalisay was recognized for her traditional methods and exceptional results in national exams, suggesting that perhaps there had been a misunderstanding. With unshakable calm, Manny interrupted the justifications, making it clear that he was not there as a celebrity or political figure seeking special treatment, but simply as a father concerned about his son's emotional well-being and questioning the pedagogical approach that allowed publicly humiliating a student, regardless of who their parents were. Manny's proposal completely surprised Director Bayani. Instead of demanding the teacher's dismissal or threatening to withdraw his son from the school, actions that would be within his power and influence, he requested only the opportunity to attend a complete class of teacher Dalisay, sitting discreetly at the back of the room, like any parent interested in their child's education. The seemingly simple request left the director visibly nervous, as if he sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen in that school that took so much pride in its methodological rigidity and impeccable academic results. The director, caught off guard, hesitated at this breach of protocol that would normally require prior scheduling, but faced with the undeniable request from such an influential figure, he authorized the exceptional presence. The buzz among the students was inevitable when Manny Pacquiao's world-recognizable figure entered teacher Dalisay's classroom discreetly, accompanied by Director Bayani, who seemed simultaneously proud and apprehensive about the illustrious visitor's presence. Emmanuel Jr., sitting at his usual desk, looked at his father with a mixture of surprise and apprehension, uncertain about the intentions behind that unexpected visit. With a small, almost imperceptible nod, Manny reassured his son sitting in the last row, while the director briefly explained to the class that they would have a special observer that morning. Teacher Dalisay, initially disconcerted by the famous boxer's presence, quickly recomposed her authoritarian posture and began the class as usual, perhaps with an even more pronounced formality. The day's topic was quadratic equations, a continuation of the subject that had resulted in Emmanuel Jr.'s humiliation the previous day. Manny carefully observed each of the teacher's movements, analyzing her methodology like someone studying an opponent's movement patterns before a big fight, especially noting how she seemed to favor certain students while practically ignoring others. In the middle of the explanation, teacher Dalisay proposed a challenge for the class. Whoever could correctly solve a particularly complex equation would earn extra points in the final evaluation. Immediately, anxious hands rose in the air, mainly from students who usually received more attention and praise. To everyone's surprise, including Emmanuel Jr., the teacher called the son of Pacquiao to the board again, with a smile as subtle as it was malicious, clearly expecting to repeat the fiasco of the previous day, now with the famous father's presence as a witness. There was a veiled provocation in her gesture, as if she wanted to reassert her authority even in the presence of the renowned father, perhaps to prove that in her classroom, her educational methods remained sovereign regardless of who was watching. The silence in the room was absolute as Emmanuel Jr. walked hesitantly to the blackboard, feeling the weight of his classmates' gazes and, now, also his father's. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the chalk, but something had changed since the day before. There was a new determination in his eyes, perhaps inspired by his father's silent and confident presence at the back of the room. Slowly, with meticulous care, the boy began to work on the equation, applying the knowledge he had studied exhaustively during the night after the comforting conversation with his father. Teacher Dalisay's expression gradually transformed from malicious expectation to incredulity when she realized that Emmanuel Jr. was not only solving the equation correctly, but also explaining each step with surprising clarity. The method the boy was using was not exactly what she had taught, but an alternative approach, perfectly valid and even more efficient in certain aspects. What no one in the room knew, except father and son, was that Manny had spent hours the previous night researching alternative methods to solve that type of problem, and with the help of a tutor, summoned on an emergency basis, had studied with Emmanuel Jr. until the boy not only understood the content, but gained confidence in his ability to learn and adapt, lessons that Manny had learned the hard way in international rings. From his corner, Mateo, who had previously mocked his classmate, shifted uncomfortably in his seat and averted his gaze, as if seeing for the first time the peer he had only known by surname, a hint of reluctant respect beginning to form in his expression. As Emmanuel Jr. concluded solving the equation with newfound confidence, Teacher Dalisay's face displayed a mixture of surprise and discomfort. The silence that followed was broken by spontaneous applause, initiated by Ligaya, a shy student who rarely spoke up, but who had always secretly admired Emmanuel Jr.'s perseverance. The same Ligaya who would, weeks later, surprise the school as a monitor in the new program, was beginning her own transformation at that very moment. Soon other students joined the ovation, creating a moment of celebration that drastically contrasted with the previous day's humiliation. The teacher, visibly uncomfortable with the change in dynamics in her always controlled classroom, cleared her throat to regain authority and dismissed Emmanuel Jr. back to his seat with a brief nod, without the praise she certainly would have offered to other students for the same performance. At the end of the class, when students were beginning to put away their materials, Manny rose from his place at the back of the room and, with the humble posture he had always maintained despite worldwide fame, walked to Teacher Dalisay's desk. The students immediately stopped what they were doing, anticipating some kind of explosive confrontation, perhaps inspired by the boxer's epic battles in international rings. Instead, what they witnessed was a conversation in a low voice, where Manny politely requested a few minutes of the teacher's attention after the students left, a request that she, obviously embarrassed by the presence of a national celebrity, could not refuse. With the room empty, except for the presence of Manny, Teacher Dalisay, and Director Bayani, who had insisted on staying, a conversation began that would forever change the dynamics of that educational institution. With the same tranquility with which he faced interviews after big fights, Manny shared his own educational history, how extreme poverty had forced him to leave school at a young age to help support his family, selling cigarettes on the dusty streets of General Santos City. He spoke about how, even after achieving fame and fortune, one of his greatest insecurities had always been his incomplete formal education, which is why, as an adult at the peak of his career, he had returned to his studies, facing difficulties and mockery to obtain a diploma. Teacher Dalisay listened with an impassive expression, but her eyes revealed the impact of Manny's sincere words. The boxer continued, explaining that he perfectly understood the value of discipline and academic rigor, virtues he had applied in his own sports and political career. However, he gently questioned whether publicly humiliating a struggling student would really be the most effective method to inspire excellence. With disarming simplicity, Manny suggested that different talents flourished under different methods, just as not all fighters responded to the same type of training. An analogy that, coming from a world champion in 8 different categories, carried a weight impossible to ignore. The most impactful moment of that conversation came when Manny, instead of using his influence to demand special treatment for Emmanuel Jr. or punishment for the teacher, presented a surprising proposal. He offered to sponsor a peer tutoring program at the school, where students with ease in certain subjects would help colleagues with difficulties, creating a collaborative rather than competitive learning environment. The idea, he explained, was born from his own experience in training camps, where experienced fighters often helped newcomers, creating a virtuous cycle that benefited everyone. The proposal, presented without ostentation or conditions, left both the teacher and the director momentarily speechless, confronted with a generosity that drastically contrasted with the image they had formed of the simple boxer who had become a national legend. In the weeks following that transformative conversation, subtle but significant changes began to occur at Bayanihan's school. The peer tutoring program, initially received with skepticism by teacher Dalisay and other more traditional faculty members, quickly gained followers among students of different levels. Surprisingly, Emmanuel Jr., who previously hid in the shadows for fear of comparisons with his famous father, discovered a natural ability to explain complex concepts of Filipino literature to colleagues who faced difficulties, revealing a talent that had remained dormant under the weight of expectations in mathematics. Teacher Dalisay, against all expectations, was one of the first to notice the positive impact of the initiative. Observing how previously unmotivated students began to show interest and improvement in their subjects, the rigid educator gradually modified her pedagogical approach. Without completely abandoning her characteristic rigor, she began to incorporate more inclusive methods in her classes, discovering that recognizing different learning styles did not mean lowering the level of demand, but rather expanding the reach of her effectiveness as an educator. The decisive moment came when she surprised everyone by formally requesting that Mateo, a brilliant student in mathematics but known for his arrogant behavior, assist a group of struggling students, including Ligaya, the shy girl who had initiated the applause for Emmanuel Jr. At home, Manny noticed the changes in Emmanuel Jr. with the same attentive look he had used to study opponents during his boxing career. The boy seemed to grow not only in height, but in confidence and serenity. The conversations at the dinner table, previously dominated by safe topics and generalities, now overflowed with enthusiasm when Emmanuel Jr. shared how he had helped a colleague understand a particularly difficult passage by Jose Rizal, or how his own understanding of mathematical concepts improved by studying with Mateo, with whom he had surprisingly developed an unlikely friendship based on mutual respect for different abilities. The deepest impact, however, may have been on the school community itself. Parents who for years had accepted without questioning the traditional and often humiliating methods began to notice how the new collaborative environment benefited their children. At parent-teacher meetings, stories about previously unmotivated children who now showed enthusiasm for learning became increasingly common. Director Bayani, always attentive to opportunities to promote the institution's image, did not take long to realize the marketing potential of the ongoing transformation. Organizing a special event to celebrate the preliminary results of the program, strategically inviting representatives of the Filipino educational press. The true measure of success, however, came unexpectedly when teacher Dalisay sought out Manny after a regular monitoring session of the program. Away from the curious eyes of students and colleagues, the veteran educator admitted that, after 3 decades of teaching in the same way, she had never imagined she could learn new approaches, especially from someone outside the academic environment. With an honesty rare for her normally reserved personality, she confessed that the example of humility and willingness to learn, demonstrated by Manny, a man who had achieved worldwide fame and fortune, had made her question her own resistance to change and professional growth. That confession, offered without expectation of public recognition, was for Manny a more significant victory than many of his world titles, as it represented a genuine transformation that would benefit generations of Filipino students. 6 months after the initial incident, Bayanihan School was preparing for the traditional end-of-school-year ceremony, an event that always attracted important figures from Filipino society, eager to see their children receive recognition for academic achievements. This year, however, the atmosphere was remarkably different. Instead of the usual fierce competition for individual medals and trophies, there was a sense of collective achievement permeating the preparations, with students genuinely celebrating each other's advances, regardless of famous surnames or influential family connections. On the stage, carefully decorated with the national colors and symbols of the rich Filipino cultural heritage, Director Bayani began his speech with characteristic pomp, but soon surprised the audience by deviating from the usual script of institutional self-praise. Instead, he openly shared how the school had undergone a profound reflection on its methods and values, inspired by a father who, even having reached the pinnacle of world recognition, never forgot the importance of humility and respect when dealing with any human being, regardless of their social position or academic abilities. Without mentioning names, everyone present understood the reference, and discreet glances were directed at the Pacquiao family, seated without ostentation among the other families. The most emotional moment of the ceremony occurred when teacher Dalisay, known for her usual inflexible formality, took the stage to announce a new award created specifically for that occasion, the Bayanihan Award, intended to recognize not only individual academic excellence, but also significant contributions to the collective growth of the school community. To the surprise of many, the first recipient of this recognition was Emmanuel Jr., not for being the son of who he was, but for having demonstrated exceptional ability to overcome personal adversities and, more importantly, for having used his own experience of difficulty to help other students find their own paths to success. Upon receiving the award from the hands of the teacher who had previously publicly humiliated him, Emmanuel Jr. displayed the same serene dignity that characterized his father in moments of victory. His brief thanks, pronounced in a clear voice that few had heard before due to his usual shyness, focused not on his own journey, but on how the support of colleagues like Ligaya and even Mateo had been fundamental to his growth. The mention of these names, especially Mateo's, the son of a political rival of his father, generated a wave of spontaneous applause that perfectly symbolized the cultural transformation underway in that traditionally elitist institution. In the last rows of the auditorium, Manny observed the scene with the moist gaze of a proud father, his hand firmly intertwined with Jinky's, who could not contain her tears of emotion. For the man who had conquered world titles in 8 different categories, who had faced the greatest fighters of his generation without hesitation, who had transitioned from the rings to the political arena with unwavering determination, no achievement seemed as significant as seeing his son find his own voice and identity, free from the crushing weight of others' expectations. As the ceremony continued, Manny silently reflected on how life's greatest victories rarely come accompanied by golden belts or spectacular headlines. They often happen in discrete moments of personal transformation and positive impact on the lives of others. The true revolution at Bayanihan School had not been announced in newspapers or broadcast on international sports channels like Manny Pacquiao's great fights. It was a silent but profound change in the culture of an institution that, for decades, had mistakenly confused rigor with humiliation, excellence with elitism, and success with merciless competition. Thanks to the discreet but powerful intervention of a man who had known both extreme poverty and abundant wealth, both anonymity and global fame, the school now embarked on a new era where different talents were valued, different paths to learning were respected, and the true spirit of Bayanihan, the traditional Filipino practice of community work and mutual help, finally found authentic expression within its walls.
Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next cases.